Welcome to everybody online as well, and thank you for being here. I'm going to hand over now to John Luke.
Do you want to say quick words on how this is going to work?
Yeah, so thanks to everyone who's joined in person and online. So tonight we've got two different reports that we've finalised and that we'd like to share the findings with you. So John Luke's going to give a quick overview of the program and kind of where we're at, and then we're going to invite the team from Becca to give a short presentation, and then we'll have time for questions there. So if you have any questions online, please add them to the chat, and we will try and answer those as we also answer questions in the room. And then after that, we might have a quick break for some tea and coffee and some nibbles, and then we'll jump back in with a presentation about assessment on feasibility of different floodplain intervention options. And same deal, we'll have the presentation and then time for questions at the end there. So that's how things will flow. You guys will all know this, but toilets are out there and fire exits are over there, and so all of that good stuff. Cool.
Good evening, everyone. So my name is Jean-Luc Payan. I am the manager of the Natural Hazards team at the Otago Regional Council, and I've been working on the Head of the Lake Adaptation program since 2019, since the program started. So we had recognizing some familiar faces here. We had a lot of engagement session with the community to explain what we know about hazard as we discover it, but also receive your views on the physical environment, what you value, and how you see the future of Glenorchy. So tonight is one of the key sessions around that. We've got key information to be presented. And we've got a team from Becca who did the risk assessment, who will present, and a team from Damwatch who did an assessment of what engineering intervention we could do in the Dart and Rees floodplain to try to reduce the flood hazard and the erosion hazard depending on the floodplain. Yeah. Oh, yeah. Okay. So just a reminder for people who are not familiar with the program, why we need to adapt in this area. So the first thing is there are multiple hazards, and you're probably very aware of flood hazard from the lake, but also from the Rees River and Whakatipu, or could affect Glenorchy. And the wider head of the lake. So the area of focus is not only Glenorchy, it's Glenorchy, but the Dart and Rees floodplains and Kinloch on the other side, and all that area basically that is formed by the delta and two floodplains. So multiple hazards. Flood is one of the major ones, but we also have seismic hazards. We're not very far from the Alpine fault, so we could be exposed to the shaking of those earthquakes, but also through the work we've been doing in the last few years, we've better understood the liquefaction hazard in the area. And that's something that is going to be covered later. It's quite notable for parts of Glenorchy. One aspect is the complexity of the hazard and how they interact with each other. But the other aspect, and that's really specific to this area, is how dynamic the environment is, how things are changing. It's not something very static. Every day, the river change, every day you've got sediment coming and depositing. And if we have an event, that's even, those changes are going faster in a way. So more sediment coming down. So in a simple way, there are two sources of changes. One is the morphology, the way the river behaves and the way those sediments come from the headwaters and deposit in this area. And this has an effect on the carrying capacity of the rivers, and also related to that, the flood hazard. So in a nutshell, what we discovered in the past studies is the bed of the Rees is basically building up in here, which affect how much water can flow and overtopping points. On the Dart, the other issue, and that's really a good illustration of the Dart, is how dynamic the braided river could be and how this is affecting the stability of some of the banks and ultimately affecting some of the infrastructure, such as Kinloch Road, for example. The other driver of change is climate and climate change. That's going to change also some of the processes that result in the river processes. So more rain, will favor more sediment coming down from the hill and depositing downstream. So multi-hazard, a very dynamic changing environment, which result in a way in the problem with this is how this is interacting with infrastructure, with people living here, with people live. And there is no easy solution to address this. It's not a unique hazard. For example, we've got areas where the main hazard is a flood, and you can come up with a standard engineering approach for some mitigation measures. A flood bank, for example, do a cost-benefit analysis, and that shows that whatever option A is the preferred one, we'll go ahead and work on that. Here, there will be no one unique solution to try to mitigate some of those hazards. So that's triggered the need for that adaptation program. So the complexity and the fact that there's no unique solution. So we need to consider multiple factors and options to think about the future. Just a reminder of some of the recent floods. Got 99 lake flooding in the right corner. 2020, more Rees flooding with overtopping of the flood bank near the lagoon area. And just a reminder of the bucket burn and how this can affect the access to Glenorchy in 1999. Like I said, we've got now an extensive knowledge of some of those hazards, and those are just examples of output from previous studies. Very detailed flood hazard understanding. Those are the maps on the left-hand side of the screen. That's showing depths. We also have information on how fast the water is, it could be. And the good thing, we've got now models set up to be able to test different scenarios. So we can test higher rainfall, we can test higher flows, and how this is impacting the flood hazard in the floodplain, but also for Glenorchy. Got those models for the Dart and Rees, for the bucket burn, and got a good understanding of the lake flooding. On the other side, that's an example of the understanding we have of the liquefaction hazard, and that's the type of information that was taken into account by BICA to assess the risk for Glenorchy. Please. So how are we approaching this complexity? And what's the purpose of the program? So I'll let you read the objective of the program, but basically it's about resilience. It's about improving the community, the area resilience, and that's looking to short-term, but also more importantly, the long-term future of the area, looking to 50 years, 100 years from now. How can we think about those changes? We're taking what we call a holistic approach, so not only looking to the physical environment, but also looking to the social impact of hazards and how those things are linked together. Like I said, we had a lot of building blocks done in the past to bring us to the point where we are today. So today is really kind of a point where we nearly completed all the technical studies, and we are in a phase. I think we move to the next. Yes, we are in a phase where we can move to the next stage, which is the development of the strategy. The challenge with all of that is how to deal with something we know is coming, but we don't know exactly when and how big things can be. So there's a lot of unknown that we need to deal with, but we know we need a plan for that. So one way to approach it is using the Ministry for the Environment guidelines that's been released in 2017 and updated in 2024. And those guidelines are really about having a structured approach to plan for those situations where we know things are changing, but we don't know exactly how and when. So we've got that diagram on the screen, and that's really summarizing the approach. And the way I describe it is really starting from the outside, 5 key questions. What's happening? So that's better understanding the physical environment. What matters most? That's really understanding what people value in the area. What can we do about it? That's understanding the different options, not only engineering options, but that could be other options around more preparedness, more different planning rules to deal with those changes. And the next 2 questions are about implementing the strategy and understanding how it works. Two things to note. One is this is a cycle, so it's kind of always evolving and taking into account new knowledge and also making sure the implementation phase is monitored. And the other key thing is you see in the middle of all that is community engagement. So the approach we've taken right from the start is to be talking to you about the findings, to be very transparent about what we've learned and sharing that with you when we know it, and not waiting years before we come to you and say, oh, done all that work and this is what we think. It's really engaging with you about what we understand, taking your feedback on board and adapting to that. So that's a summary of all the work that's been done in the last 4 or 5 years. Got all those boxes represent different understanding of natural hazards, but things we've put in place. For example, we've installed monitoring station in the reefs, in the lagoon, to better understand or try to help during an event. If we have heavy rain, as we had in the last few days, now we can forecast the lagoon levels and see if it's likely to overtop the flood bank or not, which is very helpful information for people to respond, but also for civil defense to take into account into their planning. But we've done much more work around flood hazard. I've shown some of the maps, liquefaction, and also understanding the social impact of natural hazard. So the boxes in green here on the screen are things we've completed. Orange are things that are underway, and the white boxes, which are more around developing the strategy and implementing, are things to come in the future. So tonight we're going to focus on 2 of those, 4 of those boxes, but there are 2 topics. One is the risk assessment, and one is the intervention in the river. But the reason I wanted to have that slide here is we are really at a key step in the project. We finished all that work around what's happening, what's matter most, and we're really very advanced in what we can do about it. And now we're moving into what make it happen, basically, really starting to put all this information together into a plan. And this plan, which we call strategy, will have decision making now and in the future. So I think, I let the BECA team come and introduce themselves, and happy to have a question at the end of the BECA presentation on the program if you need. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Anna Punt from BECA. We're here today to present on the risk analysis results. So I'm going to run through the process and jump forward and one more. This is just an overview of what we're going to present today. So talk about the scope of the study, the risk analysis process, the hazards that we've assessed, the results and the tolerability to those risk level outputs. This plan here just shows the study areas. So we've got Kinloch and Glenorchy with the solid blue lines, and then the dashed blue line in Glenorchy, that's the extent of the liquefaction analysis that we'll be talking to today. I guess one of the key points to note is that I'm going to be we're going to be talking about the risk resulting from the hazards and not the hazards themselves. So I believe that previously you've had the liquefaction and flooding results presented to you. So we're taking that information and we've run risk analysis based on those results. And that is that's the overview of the process. So that's the top part there, the hazard definition work. And so this is the liquefaction and analysis and flood modelling largely that was presented previously, and that has been used to inform the risk analysis, which is the next 2, apologies, but the next 2 parts of the qualitative analysis and the quantitative analysis forms the risk analysis. That's based on the Otago Regional Policy Statement guidelines. So we followed a process that is relevant to Otago in running the risk analysis. The first stage is the qualitative analysis. So that's sort of using judgment and observations to assign risk levels of acceptable, tolerable and significant based on the results. I'll talk about that more in a bit more detail in a couple of slides about those risk levels. And then, so the qualitative analysis is kind of like a screening process, and then any hazards that are identified as significant are taken through to a more detailed quantitative analysis. So that provides a risk value, it's a numerical value, and then risk levels are recategorized using those same terminology as acceptable, tolerable and significant, which I will talk about again in a bit more detail. So we've finished this work now. It's had peer review, it's undergone peer review by Tonkin and Taylor, who did the liquefaction analysis. And now this next step is the risk tolerability. So that's part of that process is engaging with the community about your tolerability to these risk levels, which I will come back to, I guess, at the end. So I'm going to go through the process a bit more over the next couple of slides. So this is just the limitations of the study. And the first point here, that it's not property or people specific. What that means is that assumes that people or buildings could be present anywhere within the study areas. And that allows for comparison of risk levels. So it's not based on where an individual property or a person is. I get the other limitations. It's based on the existing climate and environment and existing land use and built environment. And then that next point, that there's no New Zealand standard for risk analysis from natural hazards. So we've used the Otago Regional Policy Statement, which is relatively new, but that's based on an established guideline in the Australian Geomechanics Society guidelines, which has been adopted in New Zealand pretty extensively up till now. So just some terminology around risk. So a hazard is something that has the potential to cause harm, and the risk is the likelihood of that hazard causing damage or harm to people. And risk is calculated by the likelihood of a hazard times the consequence. So these risk categories that I spoke about before for both the qualitative and the quantitative assessment, they are based on the Regional Policy Statement guidance. So that's what the terminology comes from. And what these levels mean is acceptable is a risk that anyone is prepared to accept. Tolerable is, this is a bit of a chunky definition, but risks that society can live with to secure certain benefits. So on balance, people think it's worth living in an area with that is subject to risk to live in the place that they want to live, essentially. And significant is risk that exceeds tolerable bounds. So that's risk that the community is not prepared to accept. So this risk level naming comes from the Regional Policy Statement. A key part of the process on risk tolerability is getting community feedback to tolerable levels. So that is part of this discussion and tomorrow as well. And we'll come back to that at the end. So this is the qualitative, so the first step in the process based on the Regional Policy Statement guidance. As I mentioned, risk is a function of hazard and consequence, and you can see, or likelihood and consequence, you can see this table at the bottom that comes from the Regional Policy Statement guidance. These terms are used to assess those risk levels, so with green being acceptable, yellow being tolerable, and red being significant. So many hazards assessed in the qualitative analysis that are significant are taken through to a more detailed quantitative analysis. Qualitative analysis assesses risk for health and safety, so that's injuries and fatalities, and the built environment, which includes lifelines. So for the qualitative assessment, it includes roads, infrastructure, services, power, etc. And that's the key difference between that and the quantitative analysis that I'll talk to. I think that's it. So this is an overview of the quantitative, more detailed analysis, which assesses the risk to life and the risk to property. It doesn't consider lifelines. It's calculated by these 4 conditional probabilities. So an annual probability of an event occurring, a spatial probability, so the area that it affects, a temporal probability, so it's a time-based probability, and a vulnerability, which is the impact on the person or property if all of those things occur. And the output is a risk value, which is talk about a bit on this next slide. So for the quantitative risk levels, a risk value is provided. So that's normally displayed in scientific notation, like on the second column there. And these risk values are then assigned a risk category in accordance with the Regional Policy Statement. So the acceptable, tolerable, and significant And I'll loop back to that at the end. So next slide, please. These are the hazards that have been assessed as part of this process. So the qualitative, we'll talk through how they're assessed, but the hazards that were included in the qualitative assessment and the ones that were the gaps for the quantitative assessment are hazards that didn't warrant further analysis because the risk levels were low enough. And we'll run through those at the end. Of note is when we're assessing each hazard, you look at 3 scenarios for each hazard, so 3 scales of events. So a sort of more frequent, less severe event, a medium-sized event, and a maximum credible event. So the process that we went through is that there was a long list of hazards provided to us by ORC, and that was refined to the list of these hazards shown here that were assessed based on available data and sort of judgment-based risk of hazards that warranted analysis. You'll see that liquefaction and lateral spreading was assessed for Glenorchy, but not for Kinloch, and that is due to the availability of data. Yeah, I think that's it from me on an overview of the process. I'm going to hand over to Elliot, who's going to talk about the flooding hazards.
Yeah, so my name's Elliot Tuck, based in Christchurch. Spent a little bit of time down here boating and hunting and different things, but here to talk to you about flooding tonight. So I won't labour on these pictures too much. Jean-Luc did a pretty good job explaining them. One thing I'd like to point out, you probably know that these 2 images in the middle here, this is a kind of topography of the town. You can see that the higher elevations where the Glenorchy word is, and as you probably all know, the kind of the lower land around the edge of the river and the lake itself. The image below that is just taken from the flood modelling work that has been done in the past, and that kind of forms the basis of all this risk analysis. So we haven't kind of generated any new data as a result of this, kind of taken that and applied the process that Anna's gone through. Yeah, slide. So thought I'd just kind of give an example of what the analysis looks like. So you'll see some slides further on that might be all green or all red or all yellow, depending on the risk tolerability categories that Anna was talking about. So it's actually done in a reasonably granular scale, thanks to the flood model results. Obviously, we have depth across the whole area. This is a risk to life for the Glenorchy, but the same process and method was applied to Kinloch. So in this slide, we can see the 3 return periods. So this is, I think, yeah, we did 50-year, 100-year, and 500-year for all the river sources. So that's Rees, Dart, and Buckleburn. We've also got this joint flood scenario at the bottom here, and this one included Bible Stream and also a small catchment. I think it's called Glenorchy landfill catchment as well. So we worked our way through the process, which is the quantitative assessment with those 4 variables that Anna talked about. So we had things like the spatial probability, which is the extent of flooding, the annual probability, which is the return period of the flood itself. We had what's the chances of someone actually being there when it floods, and what effect does that flood have on the person. So, and these are the risk numbers that we come out with at the end there. I think it's probably reasonably obvious. The darker colours represent a higher risk, and it kind of matches what I was pointing out before with the lower lying parts of town as well, and obviously in the riverbeds themselves where the water is deep and flowing relatively quickly. So that's that slide. So what we also did, the regional policy statement dictates that we do a combined event as well. So that's taking all of the return periods that we saw before and assuming they all happen in 1 year. So they're all kind of stacked on top of each other. So we get a worst case scenario for those numbers. Those numbers are then broken up into the risk categories here. So this is risk for life for both Glenorchy and Kinloch, and you'll see that there's no, obviously no buckler burn or joint flood scenario for Kinloch, because its major risk is the Dart River. Through the qualitative process, the risk to life was a little bit different to this. We used the direct results from the hazard assessment that was done as part of the flood study, and that assumes there's somebody always present. There's someone in the riverbed, and it ranks it on an H1 to 6 guide, and that takes into the velocity and depth. And it looks at chances of a child being swept over, as well as an adult, cars moving, damage to property as well. So that came out with a slightly higher risk profile within this. Once we added in the probability of the event happening and someone actually being there, not only being there, but being there in a community that has a warning system for a flood, so that they have the ability, or some people have the ability to escape thanks to the warning system. So once we timed all those things together, we ended up with a new number, and it meant that the risk to life has become acceptable across both of the study areas. The property risk was a slightly different story. So again, it's a combined event here, and we can see, similar to the flood maps, we've got a much higher risk around in the riverbeds, around the edges of the lake and the Rees River. You can also see down in the joint scenario there, you can see the effect of Bible Stream as well, coming back through the east side of town and heading out towards the Rees Lagoon there. So that's added a level of an extra level of risk when we compare it to just flooding from each one of the sources. The Kinloch study area, essentially, it's probably quite hard to see, but essentially anything east of the Kinloch Road itself is in the significant risk, and anything to the west of the road is in the acceptable range, which again is due to the topography of the area. We also assessed the lake flooding by itself. All of those model results that we looked at previously with the river flooding also included a lake level. I believe it was a 10-year lake level applied to each the flood events. So what we've done here is we've looked at 3 different lake levels, which is the 20, 50, and 100-year lake levels. And this wasn't part of the river modelling. It's just essentially taking the LiDAR and plotting that fixed level of that return period on the surface. So similar to the kind of joint scenario or the restart, you can see the significant risk around those low-lying edges, and a similar story for Kinloch. Yeah, is that slide? I think that's it, but yeah, I'm happy to take your questions at the end of Marcus's presentation.
Good evening. I'm Marcus Gibson. I'm a geotechnical engineer. I'm also from Christchurch. So I was undertaking the risk assessment for liquefaction and lateral spreading, and I believe previously Tonkin and Taylor provided an overview of their assessment of liquefaction and lateral spreading. That's fed into this assessment. These are some photos from Christchurch, just to give you examples of lateral spreading and liquefaction, just so you know what I'm talking about. So what we've got here is some lateral spreading where the ground's moving river. And over here we've got some lateral spreading that's actually just pulling the houses apart. Now, liquefaction is a process. Often after the earthquakes you'd hear about liquefaction being all the mud that was on the streets. It's not, it's a process. During the earthquake, the ground shakes, the pore pressures in the ground increase to the point that it loses strength, and it changes the way the soil behaves. And in that process, you can get settlement, You can get differential settlement across the land, and also in areas where there's a free face, which could be a slope or a river's edge. You can get a flow or a movement of the land mass towards that. In Glenorchy, the lake is actually forming a very large free face, about 25 metres high, which is quite significant. In Christchurch, the free face height is sort of 3 to 5 metres high along the river's edge. It's the Avon River, so it is a significant free face. And the schematic at the bottom is just a schematic that EQC and Ministry of Environment put out after the earthquakes, just to show the different processes. So what you can see here is spreading of the ground. That can influence buildings, but also infrastructure, for example, pipes and power cables, communication cables, and all of that. So that's sort of needs to be considered as well. Maybe the next slide. I didn't want to dwell on that too much. I just wanted to explain what we're talking about. So this is the lateral spread that was assessed by Tonkin and Taylor. So there's lateral spread a little bit to the Rees River and mainly to the lake, affecting sort of the 300 odd metres away from the lake shore the most, with the displacements reducing and moving away. We looked at 3 return periods for the assessment. We looked at 25-year return period, which is sort of it's called an SLS, a serviceability limit state level, which buildings are under the building code are designed to. We've got an alpine fault scenario, which is there's a 75% chance of an alpine fault rupture in the next 50 years somewhere, along the length of the South Island. We don't know exactly where that's going to occur, but that's a scenario that OSC was keen for us to consider, and a 250-year return period earthquake. Now, the reason that we adopted the 250-year return period earthquake is because it aligned with the assessment data, hazard assessment data that was undertaken, but also most of the change in performance of the ground is sort of between the SLS and the 250-year earthquake. Beyond that, there is damage, but the damage doesn't linearly increase with with return period. This sort of evens out. So this provides much more definition in the study. What we've done in the assessment is categorised land damage using the Tonkin and Taylor study in a way that's quite similar to how it's been assessed elsewhere in New Zealand, which is also being developed based on observations of land damage in Christchurch. So in Christchurch, the land damage was categorised visually, to explain damage for different types of dwellings. Like we've got none to minor, which is colours here that match, minor to moderate, moderate to severe. And that it just allows us to use observations from Christchurch to help inform. It also allows us to compare studies that have been undertaken elsewhere in New Zealand to sort of provide some alignment, and connectivity. So what you can see here is there's quite a range of variance due to uncertainty. Geotechnical engineering has quite an uncertainty because the ground conditions vary. And also when you add to that, the variation in the ground conditions, and add to that to the variations of earthquake, so there's uncertainty bounds. So the assessment has considered a lower bound and an upper bound condition. And you can see here that the elevated parts of Glenorchy do have much lower susceptibility to damage than the areas along the lakefront and the river's edge. So we have looked at that granularity, which you'll see later. There's maps that are quite consistent across the area. We have actually looked in a granular consideration of land damage, both for different return periods and upper and lower bounds. So maybe the slide. So the process that was undertaken was exactly as Elliot has explained for flooding and Anna explained. So we've undertaken the risk assessment to determine a risk value we've only done this for property, because in the qualitative assessment we identified that the that the risk to life was acceptable. So we didn't need to transfer that into the quantitative assessment. So for property, we have used damage ratios. So we looked at the property. So if we talk about hazard, so we looked at the return period of the hazard. We looked at the probability of a property being there, dwelling or a building of some sort. So that probability is 100%. So it's there. And then we've looked at the vulnerability to damage to different levels of ground, ground movement, considering lateral spread and liquefaction. And so if you remember the slide before, there was like the blue, green, red colouring, and then we've also put into that a little bit of lateral spread considerations. So that has provided assessment of a risk value. And what we've got here is the combined risk value for the different scenarios. Just as for flooding, we combined the 25 year, the 250 and the alpine fault scenarios to get the risk value. And so you can see, over in upper areas, the risk is lower. So there is some granularity in here, just because the severity of the damage, it's it looks pretty consistent. And so from that, based on the RPS criteria for risk tolerance, we do get that it's all significant risk based on that criteria. And a lot of that is because you only need a small amount of land damage to actually sustain quite a large amount of damage to a building. So my houses around me in Christchurch, there's no liquefaction, but there's still the damage and the repair costs were still quite high. So that's one of the reasons why the property damage values, the risk here are quite high, is because of that repair cost has been a proportion of the value of the building. Just so you understand that it's quite a big factor. So I think that's me. So I can have questions later.
So this is a summary of the results that we've discussed today. So what you have here in the second and third columns is the results of the qualitative assessment. So in that sort of dashed box at the bottom, that they're the risks that didn't require further analysis. So that's why they're grey in the next two columns, and the flooding and liquefaction risks that were taken from the qualitative analysis through to the quantitative analysis. I guess the key points here, these terms, again, these are all in relation to the regional policy statement. And the next slide, I'll talk about the tolerability. But the sort of key points here is that kind of the end result is in the purple box. And what that shows is that the risk to life from all of the hazards assessed is acceptable, but that the risks to property for the hazards assessed from river flooding, lake flooding and liquefaction and lateral spreading is significant for all of Glenorchy and Kinloch. This is a simplified kind of summary. You will have seen from Elliot's results that the risks from flooding vary spatially across the study areas, so they're confined to the lake and river margins for the significant areas and in Kinloch east of the road. But for liquefaction lateral spread, it was the whole of Glenorchy. And as I mentioned before, we didn't assess liquefaction lateral spread in Kinloch. So yeah, if you just go to the next slide. So what this all means comes down to risk tolerability. So the tolerability in the study is based on the thresholds that were provided in the regional policy statement guidance. But the regional policy statement also has this quote that's on the left, which talks to a community engagement process to understand the community's tolerability to risk and what that means to you, which is part of today and tomorrow. Just explain this graph a little bit on the right. So this is a graph for life risk tolerability, all of which is acceptable for Glenorchy and Kinloch, but it shows increasing risk towards the right, and with increasing risk is decreasing tolerability, essentially. We've got these two red dots here. The top red dot is the regional policy statement tolerable risk limit for existing developments, and the next one down is the tolerable risk level for new developments. So that is risk tolerability is generally an order of magnitude lower for existing developments. So you wouldn't build a new house in an area of known risk or a new property. You can see on the plot the flooding range for Glenorchy and Kinloch is within tolerable bounds for existing developments, and just exceeds tolerable limits for new developments, but that is outside of the built environment, so that's within the golf course areas and the river and lake margins. So unfortunately, there's no equivalent graph like this for property risk. Property risk is relatively new in comparison to life risk, the assessment of property risk, and there's no there's no kind of defined tolerability limits within New Zealand. And again, this is what comes back to our community engagement, community thoughts on risk tolerability. That is it for our presentation. So,
For the question.
yeah.
Oh, sorry. Just a comment. You probably heard a lot about the regional policy statement, and maybe some of you wonder what a regional policy statement is. So it's a document that is prepared by the regional council in collaboration with communities, open for consultation, and that sets a framework, a policy framework to manage resources or environmental issues in the region. And one chapter of that document is focused on natural hazard, and it has a methodology on assessing risk, and that's what you've heard tonight. So we've used the framework in that document to do our assessment. But yeah, if you want more information on the RPS, come and see me, or I can point you to the website. But in a nutshell, it's a document that is defined at a regional scale to guide regional council, district council, city council, and people living in Otago on how the physical environment, the resources are managed in the region. And got a chapter on natural hazards.
So we've got time for questions now. If anyone has any questions that they'd like to pose to either our consultants who did the information, or we've got a bunch of council staff in the room as well if we'd like to.
Just an online question. Start us off.
Yeah. Can you just oh yeah. So the question was, what work was the Bible flooding results taken from? And if you could just come up to the mic when you answer, thank you.
Yeah, sorry. So during the qualitative assessment, we realised that the Bible stream could pose a risk. So when we moved from the qualitative to the quantitative, we asked ORC if they'd engage the same consultant to generate a flood model that includes Bible stream. So yeah, that was supplied the kind of second half of the study.
I have to check that one. No, so it was part of the risk assessment, but we didn't do a specific standalone report.
Has anyone had a look at that version? Because I remember putting it in but years ago, and I don't think I've said really working, listening. That isn't working at all. Yeah, well, it was always a bit of a discount straight down to the bank again.
Yes.
You got to go one way. Yeah. I just wondered how effective it is.
Yeah, we haven't assessed the effectiveness of that. We are aware of that diversion, but the way we've modeled it is we've kind of didn't consider it in terms of effective. We were not sure about how efficient it was and who's in charge of maintaining it. So what we've assumed is basically that there is no diversion in place.
It has been.
Yeah, but because it's not like a formal structure, and we don't really have information. We assume in a way a conservative assumption for the flood hazard.
Is there any planned work to go ahead to make it?
The diversion.
Yeah.
We don't have a specific plan, but that's something we could investigate and see, part of the different options of something that we could investigate further.
You can see just on that aerial views how much damage that stream caused.
Yeah.
I go and have a look at it. Go and have a wee look.
Yeah.
Yourself. See how.
Yeah, we can do that tomorrow.
Yeah.
We'll hear.
Plans on.
Why isn't it? Why isn't it?
Yeah, there's no marginal strip, not along, so I haven't been there, it's good to see what it looks like.
Let's just, yeah, just put it out, let's go there, we'll give it what we do this year. And I think it's scaled down over years, it's got deeper and deeper, but it's still pretty prone to just a big rush of water coming straight in. Go and have a look, what's that?
Yeah. So we've got a comment online from Henry saying the diversion does work from my observation over the last couple of heavy rainfall events when it flows.
Yeah, well, Henry was,
Yeah, I'm not sure where Henry's property is.
just you guys have looked.
Yes.
This is maybe a little bit of context. One of your graphics showed that the risk of burn was significant, but the risk of freeze significant. So the risk of freeze is higher than the risk of burn.
Can you just, if you answer, can you just repeat the question into the microphone?
Rush.
Well, that one will do, was a graphic. Assessment things.
Just talking about.
Thanks.
Oh, the one towards the end of the table. Towards the end. You mean that one?
Yeah.
That one there?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. The buffer burn is tolerable, the Rees River one was significant in terms of the Otago assessment. I think in your assessment, you said that the flooding, particularly the flooding on the lagoon, probably with the river indication out of place in the lagoon. But there is no flooding gauge on buffer burn. Because the debris flow came down the buffer burn, there'd be nothing in there. So we could have a number of people that get pulled out because it just happens completely out of the blue and trust when they can flood. Kind of wonder why that's significant as a matter order. Buffer burn probably should be significant in the sense that if it does happen, it may be a very, very low thing. But if it does happen, potentially the gradient or it's going to be full of gravel, it's going to change.
Disconnected. Connected to mobile device.
Yes.
Just 1 second. I'll just try and get this microphone roaming for the people online, but I'll keep it plugged in until now.
I guess I'll just.
Disconnected.
Sorry, so we can
Connected
pass
to
this on.
mobile device.
Might not like this. Sorry. We might just have to get you to repeat the question into this microphone and then. Hope so anyway. How about that now? Is that working online? Yeah, it should be. Cool. Sorry. We'll just get them to repeat the question into the mic so that we're back. Apologies.
Cool. So the question was really based around the fact that there is no warning system for the buckler burn, and that it could cause a lot of damage quite quickly, whereas for the Rees River itself, there is a warning system in place and some water gate and some water level monitors in place. If I got that right? Yeah. So I guess through this stage, it was considered tolerable and significant. So something we didn't mention in this qualitative stage of it, we applied the method that had been done in the previous modelling that assigned hazard, and kind of 0 to 10 people fatalities was tolerable and above 10 was significant. So that is kind of like I said, where there's assumes a person is there all the time waiting for the flood to come and they get knocked off their feet. Once we moved to here, you're right, we did apply some type of warning system. It can be not just a kind of water level warning system, it can be weather forecast as well. That variable that we added for the warning system is based on an international study that went around and looked at fatalities from floods where there was some type of infrastructure related warning system, like a weather forecast or a gauge of some sort. But there's probably not the detail to say actually you'd get more warning for the Rees and you get a lot less for the buckler burn. That's, I guess, we didn't go to that level of detail. So yeah, you're right. It could happen a lot quicker, and it could change the life risk, bearing in mind that the buckler burn on its own has a smaller spatial extent than, say, the Rees on its own.
Yeah.
So I have a question about the flood model. What was that combined hydrological setting model, or is it purely hydrological? Because I could assume, depending on the magnitude of your flood, you have different types of sediment.
Yeah.
That probably changes.
Yeah, it does. It does change things. It's a fixed bed model. Sorry, I guess this isn't my model, but I've read the report and built a few of these. So it's a fixed bed. So it can't account for accumulation of gravel as the flood happens, and then therefore raising water level. So we're not quite that sophisticated with our flood models yet. The modelling did take into account some avulsion events, which is where there's a breakout of the Rees, so it comes more direct towards the lagoon. And if I recall correctly, that didn't have a huge effect on the flood extent. Once it overtopped the stock bank, it may make it happen sooner, but it didn't change the extent of the flooding too much. The models are relatively basic when it comes to the ability to move the bed. And I think the buckler burn also had some runs with 1, 2, and 3 metre of bed lift as well. So we used the most conservative one, which we used that because it mimicked the 99 event where the flow was able to take out the road and then travel down towards town, from what I understand. So we kind of just kept with what we'd seen in the past.
Could also just integrate like different types of like fine sediment, poison, because I assume that would really define concepts as well, but it's just like fine sediment. Yeah,
it's so dynamic because you have fines and coarse in the same river coming down at the same time, and so then it's velocity based and what drops out. Exactly. And so it's it's quite a study in itself, but I don't think that's been done.
Is there anything that's been thought out about all the sediments coming up under the Rees Bridge? How the Rees Bridge is getting, the river's getting higher. So these sorts of fact that these days that it can take a section of the bridge because of the fact that the river's getting so close to the bridge.
I'll talk about that after the break.
So there was, just for people online, there was a question about the sediments under the Rees Bridge, but that will kind of flow in nicely to the next presentation. So
there's also a question from Carl online that will hold to the answer. related to your question, your presentations.
In the perfection analysis, can you bring up the visuals for the perfection district? Right. The biggest portion of the town that was had quite low risk. We go to chat on the slide. Seeing all that analysis through the 3 different areas. The area of land new subdivision just under the Bible is all assessed as fairly low risk according to that. But my regular. And then you go to the next slide on the right, it's all risk assessed as significant risk. Just like kind of the whole town region.
Yeah, so I guess.
Can you just summarise the
Okay.
the question that you
Okay, so the question is looking at these plots of land damage for the different return periods. Why is the area of the new subdivision and the higher ground showing less damage? While if we go to the slide, yeah, in the next slide, it's seen to be still significant risk. What you can see here is in this this plot of property risk is we're combining the 3 different scenarios together, okay? And as I mentioned to you before, that even for a small amount of land damage, you can get quite a large amount of percentage of, even for a small amount of land damage, so none to minor doesn't mean that there's no land damage. Like in Christchurch, none to minor was about 15 to 20% of the property value was damaged. So when you have 3 events, 3 scenarios, you end up having the accumulation of quite a large percentage of the property value starts adding up, and that's the reason why the risk has come out as significant. And I think that as was mentioned, the categorization of tolerable and significant is based on RPS, and I think definitely for property, that's definitely one to look at, because as I explained, it's those 3 different scenarios that are added up together. And you can see in this map here that there is a lower risk in that area. Yeah. It's just the process means that you get to that significant level. And that's explained in Christchurch as well, for example, lots and lots of areas where there was no lateral spread, only minor liquefaction, there was still ground damage, and significant value loss of property in those areas. And I think that's just, unfortunately, that's what comes through on the study that shows that that area is still significant. Now, if the thresholds were changed, then potentially that area could become tolerable, but it depends on what's tolerable for the community. Yeah, and I think tolerability would be different also for existing versus new infrastructure. So significant is just a way of explaining a relative risk. Not necessarily saying that the world's going to end with respect to that. Does that make sense? Yeah.
We've got realise that's quite a lot of information as well for people to I guess seep in, and so we'll be back. We can kind of have questions at the end of tonight too, if you think of anything, or we'll be back tomorrow if you want to have a more detailed chat. But we might take a quick 5-minute break, help yourselves to a cup of tea and some, they've got some bickies over there as well, and then we'll come back and hear from Bill, who's going to talk about the feasibility of different floodplain intervention options, his assessment of those. So, okay, great. Thank you all for, hopefully everyone back online can hear us now. So this is the kind of second part of our evening, and I appreciate there's a lot of information, so thank you all for sticking around, and great. We'll hear from Bill from Glenorchy Engineering to talk about the assessment of floodplain management interventions, looking at the Dart and Rees floodplain. So I'll hand over to Bill. What's that?
Yep, over here. Oh, thank you for the introduction. And good evening, everyone. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So my name's Bill Veal. I'm a civil engineer working for Glenorchy Engineering. And for the next 20 minutes or so, I'll be talking about the Rees and Dart rivers and the assessment of floodplain intervention options that the Glenorchy team has been looking at this year. So if we look up to the scope, so I'm going to cover the scope and objective of the assessments. I'll give you an overview of the approach methodology and then summarise the key findings and outcomes. An opportunity for questions at the end of the presentation and also tomorrow if you're available. If we move on, and just so you know, there's a lot more detail on these assessments in 3 reports listed here, and these are now available on the Otago Regional Council website. And finally, by way of introduction, this is just the map showing the geographic locations of the assessment areas we looked at. So starting with the lower Rees, the true left floodplain, and towards Glenorchy in the lower right of the image. We also looked at the true right bank floodplain of the Dart River, the access road to Kinloch, and then the upper Rees, focusing around that Rees River Bridge area and to the north. So moving on to the scope and objectives. So basically the objectives were to assess the viability of different options to mitigate existing flood hazards and provide an evidence base to rule out options which weren't viable for whatever reason. We also tested the different options against their alignment with nature-based solutions, approach to floodplain management, and I'll talk a bit more about that shortly. And then finally, the most viable options were taken forward to a concept level design stage. So that's basic engineering drawings and costings. Moving on, outside of the scope, so it's always good to know what we didn't look at. One of the key ones was backwater flooding from high water levels in Lake Whakatipu. Very different source of flood hazard, and we were just looking at the river flooding. We also didn't look at options to raise or lengthen the Rees River Bridge or raise or reroute the existing Kinloch Road. So we didn't look at modifications to transportation networks. I will touch on Kinloch Road later. And also there are a number of options previously discounted in a 2002 floodplain adaptation workshop. We didn't go back and reach those. So what I'll do now is just give you a general overview of the approach we took to the assessments, and then I'll give you the key findings shortly after that. So the general approach, we firstly developed an understanding of the existing flood hazards and geomorphological setting of the Rees and Dart river systems. We did that looking at existing reports, background information, site visit, and just anecdotal information from people in the area. We also looked at, then we developed what's called a 2-dimensional computational hydraulic model, which is basically a computer model of the river system, and that allowed us to model different floodplain options and look at their effectiveness. So moving on. So once we looked at the effectiveness of the model, the options with that model, we could also compare them against meeting nature-based solution objectives. So some of you might have heard of that term before, nature-based solutions for floodplain management, but for those of you who haven't, basically it's a concept where you're looking at things like floodplain widening, providing storage areas, wetland areas to mitigate flood risks rather than hard engineering solutions such as flood banks, flood walls and the like. And there's definitely a movement in the, river engineering community internationally and within New Zealand to focus on these issues rather than hard engineering solutions, which require a lot of maintenance, but also as we're seeing at Glenorchy, the level of service reduces or can reduce over time. And then finally, for the viable options, we took those through concept level design phases. So we provided drawings, indicative construction costs, a preliminary review of consenting, design and construction considerations. We also looked at the long-term resilience testing. So how do they perform under climate change impacts, as well as riverbed aggradation, and also potential issues of further work if any of those options are going to be carried through to future stages. So I'll go, well, hopefully that gave you an idea of how the assessment worked. I'll give you some of the key findings, starting with the lower Rees. So that's obviously, we all know where we are. So the options that we looked at, they came out of that 2022 floodplain adaptation workshop. Option A is pretty self-explanatory. It's basically raising the existing northeast floodbank, which runs to the north of the town. I'll talk about that more in a minute, because that did turn out to be a viable option. Option B was looking at basically floodplains or berms to try and push water out of that left bank floodplain and back into the main river channel, and doing so reducing the flood hazard at Glenorchy. We looked at two sort of sub options there. One was this yellow line, which is an incredibly long flood bank on that left river's edge. It was effective at keeping water out, but it needs to be 2 or 3 metres high, and you can see they're sort of 6 kilometres long. It really goes against those nature-based solution options, let alone construction costs, and also in terms of resilience. Multiple places where it could be attacked by the river wanting to migrate into the floodplain or overtopped. So those options, although they could provide some effect at mitigating flood hazards, really not viable for the reasons I just mentioned. Option C was a vegetated buffer. So the idea was similar to providing a berm, but instead using vegetation to try and deflect and slow floodplain flows and direct it back into that main river channel. Unfortunately, that option just didn't work when we tested it within the model. Just the relatively steep nature of that floodplain, water just went straight through. It slowed down a bit, but it didn't deflect it back into the river. So that really left us with option A as the most effective of those options. So if we have a look at option A in a bit more detail, basically this is a plan showing the existing stop bank alignments, sort of a yellow shading. Colours don't come out quite so good there, but basically what we're looking at doing is raising that existing stop bank. So building on top of it, we worked out if you raise it by about 1 metre, you'll get up to a 1 in 100 year return period level of service. The existing stop bank has about a 1 in 20 year return period before it overtops. And basically building the stop bank up, but also the footprint will need to be pushed towards Glenorchy. As you come up, you need to push the stop bank up out further as well. Those red circles are culverts. There's one here which I'm going to have a look at tomorrow because it wasn't identified, but someone locally said there was one there, so I'll go and have a look at that tomorrow. And they'll need to have a flat back basically on their river side so that water doesn't back up during floods. So that in a nutshell is the raising option. If we just flip over to the next slide, So effectively, this is the Land River Sea study, which shows the 1 in 100 year flood inundation with a 1 in 10 year lake level. So obviously all those relatively low-lying areas in the flood hazard zone. And what the stop bank does is it basically holds that water back within the lagoon area and deflects it towards the main river channel. But effectively reduces the flood hazard to those properties which were previously affected. What it doesn't do is there's kind of a very dark shading, come out that well, but that's properties that would be flooded in the 1 in 10 lake level flood. And obviously the stop bank doesn't defend against that. The lake will come in from the south into the west and flood those areas anyway. So if we move on to the next one. So for this flood bank raising option, the key benefits, as I mentioned, it increases the level of service in the existing flood bank and has a reduction in the number of properties directly impacted from river flooding. Of course, that comes at a cost. Our cost estimates indicate it could be in the range of 1.6 to 2.3 million. So that's for design, consent and construction. There's a fair amount of earthworks in there and also quite a lot of tree clearance required to get in, cut back that stop bank and build it up. That cost doesn't exclude any required land purchase costs. And in terms of residual risks, so like I said, it doesn't defend against lake level flooding. Also, it's built to a certain design standard, so there's always a chance of larger floods overtopping or breaching it. That last one, potential erosion. There's always a risk of erosion of flood banks, particularly the existing one. We don't know a lot about it in terms of how it will perform during floods. That can be mitigated during detailed design through erosion protection, rock lining, but something that needs to be looked at if this option is pursued further. So happy to answer questions on that later, but in the interest of time, I'll move on to the Dart River assessment options. So the Dart River, if we just flip to the next slide. Yeah, the scale of the flood hazard here, it's very challenging to defend against with conventional engineering solutions like flood banks. So the river is migrating, or there's a lot of riverbank erosion on that right bank, and it's migrating towards the road. Very large discharges and combined with ongoing river level bed aggradation. So the floodplain interventions options we focused on were looking at trying to mitigate that riverbank migration, trying to prevent damage to Kinloch Road, and trying to reduce the rate of farmland loss between the road and the riverbank, which is the additional benefit of providing protection for the road. We move on to the next one. So the intervention options we selected here were basically a combination of rockfill and vegetated buffer protections. And we prioritised these to allow for staged adaptation. So this figure here basically shows the different intervention options we selected. And the sort of philosophy here is we're trying to hold the line of that right bank river's edge. So like I said, it's migrated significantly over the years towards Kinloch Road. And in many places where those black lines are, it's got so close to the road that QLDC has intervened and put rock lining there to prevent further migration. So what we're trying to do here is supplement those existing measures, basically connecting the dots where there's not much buffer between the river's edge and the road, using new rock fill in red, as shown on the diagram there. And also there's a sort of pinch point down here where, again, the river's edge is getting very close to the road and threatening its ability. Other areas you've got more buffer and I guess more time to develop a solution before the river gets close to the road. And so what we're proposing here is basically what's called a vegetation buffer, and that's planting. And basically what that planting does is it the root network and combination of low, reduced velocities mitigates that erosion risk. But of course, vegetation has its own risks because it needs to become established before it is effective. And while it's being established, it's obviously vulnerable to flooding and being washed out. So that's why we're promoting it in areas where you have more time before the river potentially migrates towards the road. We did also look at localised raising of Kinloch Road, just at a sort of high level. That is definitely complementary. There's parts of the road which you can raise to get them out of that flood zone and provide some mitigation. So again, it's those combination of options which can well be effective in this area. So that's Kinloch in summary, or the Dart. And finally moving on to the Upper Rees. So similar to the Dart, again, a very challenging area, just due to the scale of the flood hazards. Again, the grading riverbeds, very large flood discharges, and also that lateral riverbank migration erosion processes. So sort of hydraulically, under flood conditions, there's basically not enough capacity through the bridge waterway to convey the whole flood through that relatively narrow bridge waterway. And so the river naturally breaks out on the true right and left floodplains. It needs that floodplain conveyance to pass the flows. There's more of a tendency to break out on the true right, just due to the lie of the land. And there is an existing floodbank system on the right bank, shown with that red line and also the yellow line closer to the road. That floodbank, though, is outflanked in larger flood events, and even more frequently we've seen it overtopping in places. So if we move on, a bit more background on the Rees. So the bridge itself was constructed in 1950, and then a floodbank system on the right on private land was constructed in about 1980, and that's those yellow lines on the last slide as well. And basically what the floodbank system is doing is it's diverting flow into the bridge waterway, so it's increasing flows into the bridge waterway, and in conjunction with the channel bed aggradation, it's slowly lowering the level of service of the bridge. So if we move on, so there's really no silver bullet here, and we didn't look at options to raise existing floodbanks. Again, the length of those floodbanks makes them, one, quite expensive to implement, but also the long-term resilience is very difficult to maintain due to those riverbank erosion processes. So the floodplain intervention options we were looking at and which met more of those nature-based solutions, were basically providing a managed floodway on either the left or right approaches to the bridge. So those are those two black arrows down there. The idea of these is to guide floodplain flows in defined areas past the bridge and try and reduce flood discharge through the bridge waterway, the Rees River Bridge waterway, which is the key asset. And also looking at options which align with nature-based solutions. So obviously raising existing silt banks. In this example, it's trying to restrict the river rather than giving it room. And so we weren't looking at those options, at least under this assessment. I won't go into more detail on these ones now, but happy to answer questions. But neither of these floodways were particularly effective. They provided some benefit in reducing discharges through the bridge and taking pressure off the bridge, but they came at the expense of basically increasing flood frequency on the approach roads to the bridge. So those would flood more frequently. So the net benefit was not great. So we do, in the reports, there's more detail on them and costings and things, but I think overall the benefit of these options weren't as good as the other ones. So move on from there. And the other thing is I haven't put the costs there, but I do have them at the end. So if you want to ask questions, we can bring those up. So just to summarise before the questions, so we looked at potential floodplain options for those three study areas and took the more viable option through to concept design stages. And in terms of next steps, see what we're doing now, community engagement. What does the community think and want about these options before various ones could or taken forward or adopted. But before you go through to engineering design and implementation, a number of issues need to be looked at, such as funding arrangements, constraints, land ownership. A lot of the works are on private land, and of course consenting to enable us to go ahead. So going back to Jean-Luc's presentation, this is sort of, we're at that option stage, and then what happens next is to be seen. No, thanks for your time. Any questions?
So my understanding is parallel trends, like when the shot of it, like expected down parallel causes the lake to rise quite quickly. Floods.
Yeah.
Putting in raising the flood bank on protected town Rees River. Look at the feasibility of not protecting the river, then obviously mentioned that lake rising into account, but if the shot of it in flood, the lake's going to rise very quickly in 2 days. So that's really just implying us a little bit of those. I know your studies are quite specific, but on the short would be what's the point of putting in a flood bank?
Yeah.
And so, like, if you're going to have the lake rise,
if the lake's going to get you in. Yeah. So correct me if I'm wrong, but the question is, if the lake is going to cause flooding anyway, what's the point of defending against the river flooding? Yeah.
avoid currents, but back when
yeah.
So get that water inundation just at a slow speed
From the lake.
on the lake.
Yeah. No, I mean, this study was focusing just on the river flooding. The lake level flooding is a totally different hazard. And yeah, no, yeah, I don't know how to answer that one, to be honest. I mean,
it was brought up in one of the meetings that like all around the town.
Yep.
And the answer kind of was, well, we'll have to the house prices, and then when the dam breaks, the whole town's
So that-
become a lake.
that's it's like a seawall. You're trying to keep the sea up. It's a significant engineering challenge. Talk about that before, but you get seepage and underflow under the wall itself, boils, and so in fact have to cut sheet pile it all the way around, but also the visual aspects, you're sort of barricading yourself in, and I don't know how high the wall would need to be, but yeah. So conceptually, it's a very difficult thing to defend against. Yeah, I don't know if you have any comments there, Jean-Luc.
Yeah, so one of the points is the effect of having that's something people really value, I think, being able to access a lake and have that visual connection with that environment. So that's a challenge we have to deal with in here, not only because of the lake, but for the lake, but for other options, engineering options, hard engineering. We're really conscious of the effect on the environment and visual landscape. The other thing, what we have to mitigate lake flooding, or not really mitigate, but to deal with that is a flood warning system. So we can also forecast, based on rainfall forecast, what the lake level would be.
That's like
Yeah, correct. And the district plan has also a minimum flow level that's taken into account a high lake level. So in terms of building new houses, or that's been on for a while, properties are elevated to deal with lake flooding and not necessarily with the risk flooding. That's where the benefit of having a flood bank comes. But you're right, it's a challenge to mitigate all the flood sources.
I don't want to create a wall and then end up with a low depression behind the wall, like rises and then got a lake.
Exactly.
Can you just explain on the map what areas does get flooded from the lake flooding as opposed to the river flooding?
Yep.
Or I just put on the area.
Yeah. Not best image, but
There's one in the risk assessment.
yeah, I'll try this one first. And
Okay.
if it doesn't explain this, this is quite a very dark shading. That's the 1 in 10 lake level flow, and basically on this map here, that is the 1 in 10 lake level flow. So it's kind of a handful of properties around this corner, which are most vulnerable. Obviously, at higher lake levels, it'll push sort of up the fan. But does that answer the question? Or
I think it's just how to understand that.
Yeah.
The number of properties. The flood bank still does some value greater than the 10-year flood.
yeah, and I'm not sure what's happening sort of south of the town, but
Yeah, but I quite like option C
just that one.
because the willows.
Yep.
If you get bigger width, like in 3 or 4 big lines and lay big willows in them.
Yep.
Get them growing, and they'll take water through them, and slowly logs and stuff builds up silt. It's not going to happen overnight, but it's really so cheaper than all the rocks.
Yep.
And you will just slowly have time to up that.
It does help, and if you do build them on a little bit of a platform as well, sort of all.
Well, I found that if you put them in the ditch and just cover them, don't knock all the bark off. They grow and they're up 2 meters high in about a year or so, and they're the best filter of you.
Yep.
Yeah. Water goes through.
But it slows the velocity down significantly as well.
Big old willows around.
It's much like that. I think one of the things about hedge buffer design it to allow the fines, because if you slow water down, it's going to drop the big gravel. And still let the dirty water through, so there'll be a good silt go through. But in terms of the potential future flooding in Glenorchy, you don't want gravel.
Yeah.
But it's that could actually carry through water. So I think that vegetated buffer has an added benefit. You can actually design it to drop the big gravel particles at
Right.
that point, which is going to help with flooding anyway. You let the fines through.
It becomes like a filter for, yeah. Yep. I guess the issue with it, we found anyway, and points well taken. But yeah, just due to the steepness of this floodplain, water would still push through it anyway and get to the lagoon area and Glenorchy. So yeah, so as long as you're, protecting the town, so you sort of need to do both of them to really reduce the flood risk. Yeah.
It's not far to go. It's breaking it up there by Rees and Dart. It's not, it's extra. So any big logs that start spilling over. So,
Yeah, I mean, if you did look at that option, so you need to be quite clever about where you put it as well, because what we're finding in big floods, water would break out down here, but it would also come through. It would break out in multiple locations. So, we cite it as quite important as well. Yeah.
With we call it the meat, but essentially that was that manufactured little break or joint between the Rees and Dart. Yes.
Yeah.
It does have a relatively consistent flow. The Rees between east, Dart, west. Is there anything that could be done to sort of draw water from the Rees to go to the west side of that line?
Yeah. Did that come up in the 2022?
Yeah.
Yeah. But we didn't look at that because it wasn't tabled then. And also there used to be a flow path through this now sort of vegetated island. If you go back to the sort of 60s photos. Yeah. I think that probably one of the reasons is when the system is in flood, the data's up and the Rees is up. So, you can't push water into the other system. There's sort of
That east, sorry, that west side of that island doesn't have a tremendous amount. So it doesn't have a noticeable flow compared to say from the Rees.
right. So most of the flooding's coming through here.
Most of the water's going to the east side of that island. The bank on the northern end of the island is vertical, and it is slowly collapsing in. So it is taking a flow. It's doing its job, but no influence. So it's what we're taking to see if you could direct more water
try and divert a bit more into the
and it shouldn't affect Kinloch because it's still.
Yep. No, good point. And see Jean-Luc's writing it down. So yeah, well taken.
How much higher is the LiDAR vision in the middle of the dark there? Over to the banks inside. You're talking meter high.
Oh, yeah. Sorry, the question there is, what are the relative bed levels between the Dart and the Rees?
Well, just how much the whole watershed when it's in full flood. Towers going.
Yep.
Right.
Yeah,
So how much higher is it?
I don't know off the top of my head, but I can grab the flood model tomorrow and look at it if I can send it through to Jean-Luc to you. Yeah. I don't know off the top of my head.
Because the LiDAR showed.
Yeah, the flood model will give us the water level difference. Yeah. That's a good question. But yeah, I'll reserve that to look looking at the model. Yep. Yeah.
Just checking the question we had before around the. Just checking that the question we had around the Rees Bridge sediment, that you're happy with the answer that was given during the presentation? No.
Gonna be another better, it'll probably be better, if. Eventually, that was going to keep coming up.
And QLDC is very aware of this, and they've done an assessment of that and the efficiency of removing rubble under that bridge. Sorry. Yeah, so I was saying just QLDC is aware of the problem, and they've done an assessment, I think, around better ways to manage the river in that area in relation to the bridge. So I can check those results and get your contacts, maybe send you that.
Might be here tomorrow.
Yes, we'll have a QLDC.
The option I think I like table is the possibility of making the town forest work. Rather than floodplains, why not? And think about setting it up so the river can flow through town. So in other words, you don't want the houses to flood. I think there are only about 3 or 4 big 5 houses that go underwater quite a lot now. So there's not many. There's a number of 20 sections. But a lot of those houses are already clean up. But sometimes see some of the sections, the whole section's built up to 312.
Yeah, the one. Yeah.
And that seems to me contrary to what we want. We want the building back.
Yep.
I would say it's garage. Garage flooding is not a problem. I'd like to see all the options. Things to make the town for us.
Yep. So yeah, the question or the comment was that another solution to look at is to make the town more porous, which means basically living with the flooding and either raising buildings or allowing the water to come through. Such that it's not affecting property and people, and that's definitely falls under the nature-based solutions category. It's living with the flooding as opposed to trying to keep it out. Yeah, I don't know. I haven't looked at that. Yeah.
Just said the question about.
Oh, it's just a question about the groundwater. So the Tonkin and Taylor study does have some groundwater maps. I can't remember. I think I don't know if there's a slide of Glenorchy anywhere for Glenorchy. I know this one's good enough. I think most of this like upper area here is a bit more than 5 meters, and then through here it's sort of 1 meter or less. Once again, I can't remember exactly, but it's quite shallow here and maybe sort of 2 meters in this area. Does that help?
But in terms of flood mitigation, the volume of water coming through the river system is so huge relative to any groundwater capacity. It's not going to be beneficial, I guess, in that regards. Yeah, that makes sense.
Even like some times come off, like I just put people in the room that I'm playing that there and what you're doing, it's a hard subject, but just raising that road up the hill isn't a no-brainer. Like the amount of money that's getting spent every year on it, and they're over there. But I'm not doing an assessment about how much does it cost to maintain this road for the last 10 years against one of it's been up roads for the last 5 hours. It's never going to happen again. But
Yeah, so the question is about the viability of keeping Kinloch Road where it is and spending money maintaining what we have instead of moving it. Yeah, so that's a key question that we are considering part of the adaptation program. So the issue in Kinloch, we're not looking at it from should we maintain the road? We're looking at it from an access perspective to Kinloch. So what are the alternatives to access Kinloch? And road is one alternative. A road that can be used by any car is one thing, but we could have something else like only four-wheel drive access during floods, or a completely different approach, which is using the lake to get to Kinloch. But the option of moving the road has also its own challenge. But I think part of the program will be to working with QLDC to assess what's the most viable long-term access to Kinloch. Is it through road? Is it through boat? Is it through the air? Is it a combination of those things? That's a key question of the strategy. And some of that work that's been presented tonight is to inform that. We've got cost now and some options around maintaining the road where it is, and we need to compare that with alternatives, which have their own challenges. Like moving the road is not a straightforward exercise because you still have catchment debris flow coming, which will undermine the stability of those culverts or whatever bridges that are needed there, and also the question around land ownership and all that. It's not a straightforward solution. It's one of them that need more investigation to assess the benefit of doing that.
Any questions? There was a question around, I think we've covered around, there's a long flood bank that covers the reefs and the lake, an engineering solution. And yeah, no, I think that was the main question.
Cool. So thank you very much, Bill. I'll just kind of finish up this evening. So I guess to paint a picture now, we kind of have this, and for many years the ORC has been working to gain a really robust understanding of the hazards and risk, and I think we can kind of confidently say now that we have a really robust understanding of these things from a technical perspective. But that's not the end of kind of this discussion and adaptation in Glenorchy and at the head of the lake. So particularly around these two, all the information that we've presented tonight, there's kind of ongoing discussions that we are having with Queenstown Lakes District Council and also Emergency Management Otago about what this information means. It's not kind of information that we can, change things with in a couple of days. It's going to be, stuff that takes months and long times to think about what this new information means and for those next steps. And we're also kind of continuing to talk to them about what does collaboration look like here, roles and responsibilities for maybe implementing some of these adaptation kind of responses or looking at the next steps as well. So as we're here tonight to talk to you about these. We also we'll be at the hall tomorrow, as we kind of know that you guys know this place really well and know what's going on, and also have really great ideas about how we can move forward in this space too. So that's really important to kind of build up that big kind of basket of knowledge about what's happening in this place. And then all of this is kind of working towards developing a draft adaptation strategy for a draft kind of plan for what we can do. So, and we're aiming to present that to the ORC Council by the end of the year. And then, so that will be a draft kind of version of that. And then we'll have a couple months where people can take a look at it, give us lots of feedback, and then we can kind of incorporate that all and try and have a finalised strategy towards the middle of next year. And that strategy really kind of will try and pull together all this knowledge that we've been kind of collecting and between, the council and the community over the past almost 5 years now on this project particularly, but bringing that all together and then kind of pointing in the direction that we're all trying to get to and kind of outlining some ways in which we're trying to get there all together. So that's the idea of the strategy. It's really giving us a common direction to make sure that everything that we're doing from all, from QLDC and ORC and Emergency Management Otago and the local community and Manawhina, we're all kind of heading in the same direction. So that's the idea moving forward. And then this last slide, sorry, John, it's just a reminder. So tomorrow, this is obviously a lot of information that we've shared with you tonight, and you may have more questions as you head home this evening. So tomorrow we're going to be here at the Glenorchy Hall from 2 till 7. So we'll have a bunch of ORC staff there. There's also going to be some staff from Queenstown Lakes District Council, and also all of our team who presented tonight will be here. So if you've got any more questions that you'd like, you can come have chats with us all tomorrow. And we also have some kind of adaptation planning and pathways kind of activities and things. If you're wanting to talk about that in more detail as well, we can have some good discussions about what the future might look like, and with all this new information that we have, how it all fits together. But if you can't come along tomorrow and you have more questions or you want a bit more information, please reach out to us. Like, we're happy to arrange another time to talk through this or answer your questions. So we've got the head of the lake email at orc.govt.nz. And there's also, we have a webpage with lots of information. It's got the full reports online if you're interested in reading all the detail. It is quite technical information. So yeah, so if you want to get into it, you absolutely can, but you can also ask us questions as well. And then just signposting that we'll be presenting an update to the ORC Council in November. So that will be kind of the next time that we'll be presenting to ORC. So that's it for this evening. Yes, sorry, Jono.
Just about tomorrow. So tomorrow we'll have a range of teams from ORC and QLDC. So from ORC we'll have people from the engineering team, but Michelle Mifflin tonight, the manager, and she'll have people from her team there. And Natalie from Civil Defense, we'll have people from Civil Defense. So it's really important if you have time to come. It's quite a long session, 2 to 7. It's a drop-in format, so you can come anytime you want. And the purpose is for you to ask any question, but also if you have any comments or knowledge that you think is going to be helpful that we don't know about, please feel free to come and let us know about that. And we also have different staff from QLDC to talk about different matters around infrastructure or planning. If you need to discuss those things, please come if you have time. Thank you.
We do have, there have been a couple of QLDC staff online. I think that they haven't been in the room virtually, at least. I'm not sure that they're the most appropriate question to answer the road question, however. But there'll be people live or in person tomorrow as well. But we can take away, obviously, the road question and give some more information.
So if you want to post. Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. Kia tau, te rangi rāngi. Thank you.